There's a glare, and that bothers me. But oh well. Alright, so I have a con horror story about that one time I played the werewolf game. Not just the one time, but no, yeah, okay. Anyway, um, I've played the werewolf game many times, but this horror story is for the one time I played the werewolf game. If you hear a ticking noise, it's the clock. They're very loud. And also, look, you can watch the clock and see how long it takes me to make this video and how many edits I make. But I'm going to try and do it just straight through. I'm also sitting slightly off center because I'm trying to block the mess that's back here. Oh yeah, and also my hair is green. Ish. Greenish, teal, turquoise, whatever. So anyway, once upon a time, I went to Dragon Con. And Dragon Con's like a big party con. So at night, there's tons of parties. But I was like, I don't really want to go to a party. I just want to do something fun. And I found deep down in the dungeons of the Hyatt, people were playing the werewolf game. And it was just like this big room and people would just come and go as they please. And I was like, well, how long is this panel going on for? And they're like, this isn't really an official panel. We just kind of wanted to play the werewolf game. So come and go as you please. Like, we'll be here all night. And I was like, Dragon Con rules. So anyway, at the con that I normally go to, my local con, it's a lot smaller than Dragon Con, as they all are. But it was a lot smaller, and there's not really anything to do in the evening other than go to the parties. And I was like, well, I don't really want to do that. So I thought, why don't I host a werewolf game? That would be great. So I sign up for the panel, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to host the werewolf game like in the evening / night, because there's not a lot of kid-friendly things to do at night. Like, if you don't go to a party, then you just go back to your hotel room and go to sleep. And so I asked for them to do it on the Friday night. I don't remember what night of the week it was, Saturday or Friday night. You know, kind of early in the night, like 9 o'clock-ish or something. And so they're like, all right, you're approved. You know, what do you need? And I was like, I just need a big room with lots of chairs. Like, that's really about it. So they were like, all right, you have, you know, Friday night or whatever at 9 o'clock, you can use room, you know, 1C. And I was like, cool. So the time comes, and I get there like 30 minutes, like 15 minutes early, because I'm like, I'll set up and, you know, put the chairs in a big circle. And the room is locked. And I asked the guy standing outside the room, I was like, hey man, I'm supposed to be in this room at 9 o'clock. And he's like, oh, well, I don't know if it'll be ready then. And I'm like, huh? And he's like, well, after the drag show, this is the room where all the drag queens come and change clothes. And I was like, okay, when does the drag show end? He's like, 9 o'clock. And I was like, okay, that's when my panel's supposed to start. So that's a problem. And he's like, and I'm like, cool, I guess I'll just sit outside and wait. And he's like, yeah, you can wait, you can't go in there. I was like, okay. So I'm waiting, and like 9 o'clock comes, and like people start to show up for my panel, which I'm like, oh my gosh, people want to play the werewolf game. And, you know, they're showing up, and he's telling them, no, you can't come in this room, like people are changing, come back later. And so I'm like, this really sucks. Because the con, like, overscheduled the room. I don't know how long it takes drag queens to change clothes. You know? And, like, I don't know when I'll be able to have this room. And there are people that want to play the werewolf game that are coming and realizing that the room is occupied. And they're like, hey, I don't want to wait. Let's leave and go find something else to do. So I'm kind of, like, losing people. And I'm like, people, come back. But there are a lot of people. There are a lot of people that are hanging out, you know, and they're kind of like, yeah, sure, we'll wait, like, whatever. So I'm like, cool, this is awesome. Like, everything will be fine. And so then I talked to one guy, and he's like, oh, are you here for the werewolf game? I'm like, yeah, I'm hosting the panel. And he's like, well, what cards are you using? He's like, what deck are you using? And I was like, huh? And if you don't know the werewolf game, basically you all sit in a circle, and everyone closes their eyes, and the person hosting will pick like a werewolf, one person to be a werewolf. And so they're like, hey, all the villagers go to sleep. So everybody goes to sleep and like, werewolf, wake up. That person lifts up their head and they're like, who do you want to kill? They point to someone. And then they're like, all right, go to sleep. And then you wake everyone up and like, hey, this person died in the night. Who's the werewolf? And then everyone accuses people of being a werewolf, and it goes on trial. And then, you just slowly dwindle the number of people that you have until either the werewolf is found or everyone's dead. So I was like, I don't think I understand how you play werewolf to the fact that you have a deck of cards. And he's like, yeah, I have the expanded pack and blah, 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 and, whatever. And I'm like, I think we're thinking of a different werewolf game. So then I started getting really nervous. I was like, what if this isn't the game I'm thinking of? What if all these people are showing up to play some kind of weird card game that I don't know about? So I start talking to this guy, and he's like, oh, yeah, I run a group back in my hometown, and we play werewolf every week and blah, 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 and we're really into it. And there's like a deck of cards that comes with it. And so that's an easy way to kind of deal out who a werewolf is, because you just shuffle these cards and, there's a bunch of villagers and like a werewolf. And then there's all these other characters in there too. And he was showing me once we finally got into the room, like 30 minutes later, I went over because the drag queens were having a meet and greet. And so I went over and I was like, all the drag queens are in their meet and greet. And so I asked the dude, I was like, can someone check and see if the room is empty and that we can use it? Because apparently they went out a different exit. And so he got in, he was like, oh yeah, it's empty. Y'all can go in there now. So I was like, thank you. So like 30 minutes later, we started our werewolf game. So I told everyone to put the chairs in a circle while I talked to this guy about his deck of cards. And so he had this like insanely complicated cards to go with it. And I was like, just give me a bunch of villagers and however many werewolves you think you need, and like a doctor and a hunter. And so the hunter, while everyone's asleep, the hunter wakes up and he can pick someone. And if he picks a werewolf, then that werewolf is instantly dead. The doctor, like the werewolves pick someone to kill, they go back to sleep. The doctor wakes up and he can pick someone to heal. And if he happens to pick the same person that the werewolves picked, then that person doesn't die. But the doctor usually picks themselves because life. So anyway, so the guy was like, oh, I'm real excited that someone else will be hosting for once, because I always host the game. And I was like, cool, yeah, it'll be great. And so half the people that show up are drunk anyway. And I'm like, this is going to be great, guys. And so we deal the little cards. We just get like maybe 4 werewolves, a hunter, and a doctor, and everyone else is villagers. And there's about like less than 20 people. So we deal out the little cards, and everyone like looks at their cards, and they all go to sleep, and we do a round. And then they wake up, and I was like, all right, someone's dead. Who do y'all think the werewolf is? And this girl instantly raises her hand. She's like, I'm a werewolf. And I was like, she's not, but okay. And I was like, oh, you're a werewolf. And I was like, okay, so we have an accusation of a werewolf. Like, who wants to vote on it? Does anyone want to have a discussion? And so they're all like, well, why would she say that she's a werewolf? Like, this has to be a trick. I don't know. I don't think she's a werewolf. And people are like having this discussion. And she's like, just vote for me to be a werewolf. Like, just vote on it. And I know what's going on. Because people don't want to play werewolf unless they're a werewolf. Like, nobody wants to be a villager. They all want to be the werewolf. She was a villager. So she wanted to just instantly get voted out of the game so she could leave. And I'm like, girl, you can just get up and leave. Like, nobody cares. Because you're not a werewolf. But, so she was going to be butthurt about it. And so I finally convinced everyone. I was like, hey, she's a werewolf. Vote for her. So I finally get everyone to vote, and they vote her out. And I was like, oh, she sacrificed herself so that way your odds are better and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like hamming it up. And so then we continue through the game. And as the game's going on, I'm forgetting who the werewolves are. So when the hunter wakes up and points to someone like, oh, is that a werewolf? And I'm like, no. So I just started telling the hunter no, that no one was a werewolf, because I couldn't remember who the werewolves were. And then at one point, the guy that had the deck of cards, the professional werewolf player, he was the doctor. And so the werewolves tried to kill him, and he healed himself. And so then when everyone wakes up, I'm supposed to like narrate what happened in the night. And like an idiot, I was like, oh, the werewolves tried to kill our doctor. And I pointed at him and I was like, but the doctor healed himself. And so no one died in the night. And he's kind of looking at me like, you're not supposed to tell people that I'm the doctor. And I was like, oh, crap. Thankfully, you know, everybody's drunk. So they don't pay attention. And thankfully, he was dressed like he was cosplaying someone as a doctor. So he was wearing like a lab coat and a stethoscope. Anyway. So I kind of got away with that. And so he's trying to argue. Then they accuse him of being a werewolf. And so he's trying to argue that I already outed him as the doctor. So he's obviously not a werewolf, but they vote him out anyway. And I was like, this game has just gone to heck. Like, all hell is breaking loose. And I've lost control of the game. And I don't even know who the werewolves are at one point. And so then finally, the guy's looking around. He's like, how many villagers are left? And I was like, and he's like, have they killed any werewolves? And I was like, And so then he's like, all right, the werewolves outnumber the villagers, like, game over. And so thankfully he takes over, and it's smooth sailing after that. But man, it was rough. The con overscheduled me, and we got a late start in the room, and then I forgot who werewolves were, and we had the crabby pants lady. Oh boy. So I will never, I've learned that I cannot host the werewolf game. Like, I will gladly play, and whenever I'm a villager, I always like to cause drama, and I'm just like, that's the most fun, is being a villager. And they're like, hey, who's a werewolf? And I'm like, I don't know that guy. And they're like, why? I was like, I don't know, he blinks a lot. Werewolves blink. So, you know, it's just a lot of fun to just stir up the people. So that's my con horror story of that one time I ruined the werewolf game for everyone.